Trauma Therapist Podcast, episode 476. All right, guys, welcome to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. My name is Guy Macpherson. My mission is to raise awareness of trauma and to support new trauma therapists just starting out on their trauma-informed journey. I do that through this podcast and my membership community, Trauma Therapist 2.0. If you're a therapist of any kind, interested in learning about trauma, and you're looking for support and inspiration, I invite you to check out Trauma Therapist 2.0 by going to traumatherapist2.com. That's Trauma Therapist, the number 2.com. All right, let's get started. This episode is sponsored by Somatic Experiencing. Trauma may be a fact of life, but it doesn't have to be a life sentence. Somatic Experiencing is a psychobiological method of addressing clients' physical and emotional trauma conditions and helps to give voice to their experiences without a need for them to retell their story. SE focuses on regulation of the nervous system and offers the opportunity to engage, complete, and resolve the body's instinctual responses to traumatic experiences. For more information regarding Somatic Experiencing and the SE Professional Training Program, the Trauma Therapist Podcast listeners can visit traumahealing.org/TTP. That's traumahealing.org/TTP. All right, folks, Guy Macpherson here. Back, it's been a while since I sat down and talked into this microphone by myself and shared about myself and what's been going on. And I wanted to do that. This is right in the middle of COVID. Everyone is dealing with this craziness that's been going on. And quite frankly, I hadn't been recording for a while. As we were moving, and some of you know that myself and my family relocated from the Bay Area to Bend, Oregon. And since we've been here a couple of months now, I just wanted to sit down and share a little bit about what's been going on. As some of you know, I am starting for the first time next week a podcasting workshop for mental health professionals, coaches, survivors, advocates, how to podcast. And it's the first time I've ever done anything like this. And if you're interested, you can head over to the website, the traumatherapistproject.com, and just go to the top of the website there. And there's a place where you can just hit learn more. But I'll talk a little bit more about that later on. I just really wanted to talk about my own process and what's been going on and how I've been, struggling through this whole thing. We just got an email for our kids. We have, my wife and I, we have two kids. We have an 11 and a 5-year-old. And we just, the 5-year-old, she's going into kindergarten. So we just got her online schedule. And being the person that's home with the kids during this time, my wife's fortunately is able to continue working, but she works outside the home. I'm the one who's dealing and managing with the kids. And as those of you out there who have kids and are, dealing with them at home during this time, it's no joke. And we just got our 5-year-old's schedule for kindergarten being online. And I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, how the heck, is she gonna be able to do this? And anyway, so that's some of the stuff that's been going on for me. I've been really thinking during this time, these last couple of months, where I really haven't been doing any interviews. And I know those of you who reached out to me to be on the podcast, and I'm so appreciative of that. I want you to know that I am getting back in the saddle and going to start doing interviews again. By the time this goes live, I will have started. But I want you to know that it wasn't a brush off. It's just that this whole process for me moving, I didn't realize. My wife and I had been planning this for a while. So for about a year, we decided we wanted to move out to Bend just to be, kind of closer to nature and outdoors activities. I mean, everything here is just, you're in it. It's like 10 minutes and you're, on the river. There's this amazing river that goes through Bend. 10 minutes, you can be kayaking or paddleboarding in the river. And if you're in the Bay Area, depending on where you are, for most of the locations, it's a drive and it's a commitment. And that was one of the reasons. The other reason, we wanted just to slow down a bit. And we also wanted to be able to provide for our kids, have different activities and different priorities. And then there's just being able to get more for what we were paying for our home and so forth. So for those reasons, we moved and we're finally settled, and I'm totally psyched. But it hasn't been easy. I mean, it's moving for whatever stage you're in is not easy. But when you have kids, it's been a six ball in the air juggling act for us, and that comes with a lot of anxiety and just trying to settle in. And along with that comes a lot of contemplation about what am I doing with my work, with my podcast, and so forth. And I see a lot of people who are making amazing contributions to the field, and just thinking about my own contribution and what I'm trying to do and what I'm doing. When I first started this, I remember distinctly. I've talked to some of you before. I've shared some of this before. But when I first started this, I was in graduate school, and I knew I wanted to focus on trauma. I wanted to get in there and work with people, help people who had been through hell. I felt that I could do that. I felt like I could walk into that center with them, even though I had a lot of fears. And I've talked about those too. I was scared about hearing kids talk about their abuse, or what I imagined their stories would be. That was one of my fears. And I remember being in my internships and seeing clients, being scared to see clients who'd been traumatized, but at the same time, passionately wanting to do this, and in my heart of hearts, knowing that I could do it, that I could walk in there, when I walk into that zone with them and sit there and hold space for them and listen and be present. And even though it was difficult and challenging, I knew I could do that. And I remember being in internships and then commuting. And I was doing a lot of commuting at the time, like an hour and a half each way, being in the car, listening to podcasts, and always thinking about my clients. I don't know what I'm doing. Why are they listening to me? Why is no one listening to me? What do I have to share? Maybe I'm not cut out for this. And at the same time, I was always listening to podcasts about entrepreneurs. I just found that really inspiring. Here are people who were creating lives for themselves and businesses for themselves, and kind of writing the book for themselves, doing it their own way. And that just really attracted me. There was some niche, there's some I don't know, like stone in the pathway of my journey that just was not set right. Like I had a really difficult time in school, in graduate school, like learning, processing was weird for me. And I felt, like I didn't feel smart enough. So that was an issue for me that to a certain degree, I still have to deal with. Not as much so, but it's still like one of those things that gets me. So anyway, I was, doing all this commuting, listening to all these podcasts about these amazing people, not necessarily in the healthcare field, actually most of them not, but at the same time, thinking about my clients, the ones I was seeing, and always thinking to myself, wouldn't it be amazing if I had what I considered, a master trauma therapist right there sitting beside me, able to help me during these times, able to mentor me. Pretty soon after this or during this time, I started taking sensory motor psychotherapy workshops, levels 1 and 2. So I went through those. So I had some experience. And it got to the point where after listening to these podcasts and doing this commuting, I thought, what if I started my own podcast to help newer clinicians like myself learn and get inspired and kind of get over their own challenges and fears and hesitancies like I was trying to do. And that's how things started for me. And let me take a pause here while I take a sip of my cold coffee. Hang on one second, if you will. So I started out, and my goal was to get, on the podcast, invite on the podcast like seasoned pros, seasoned professionals. And what I found out was that it wasn't about that for me. It didn't become that. What this has become for me is bringing people on who are passionate about helping people who've been impacted by trauma. That doesn't mean they have 20 years in the business, 20 years experience. Some of them do, of course, but it's not always that. It's the person who, just like I was, who wants to do this, who's starting out doing this, who's in school, passionate about learning about trauma and becoming a trauma therapist, or they're a survivor, or they're an advocate, or they're a coach. That, to me, is what I want this podcast to be about. And the reason I say that in part is to share part of my own process, but also to let those of you out there know that it's not just for me bringing on the Pat Ogdens and the Bessel van der Kolks and the Bruce Perrys and the Kathy Malchiottis. It's not just that. Those people are great and awesome and inspiring, but it's also you out there who are, starting out and you're going through your education, or you're taking workshops, or you're advocating, or you're a survivor and you're learning how to help or share your voice. That, to me, is what the essence of this podcast is about, and why I love doing what I do. I've said before recently that, when I get off my interviews, I am on fire with excitement and inspiration because I've gotten to speak with someone who's passionate about their work, and I love learning from them and feeding off of that. And in part, that's what I wish I could do with my podcast, is like automatically, do my interview and then switch on to another podcast or recording and share what I've learned. So somehow I'm going to be able to make that work. But I just wanted to share a little bit about that, So I'm going to continue doing these interviews. I love doing this podcast, and continue to invite those of you on who are passionate about this work, whatever level you're at, whatever discipline you have. If you're a psychologist or an MD or social worker, counselor, advocate, survivor, again, whatever, I invite you, to be on here and share your journey. The other thing that happened to me was, through this process, is there was a question that I started off asking a lot. And that was, I invited my guests to share a particular mistake they made, clinical error or mistake, and what they learned from that. And that question became a question that people love to hear about. That question became something that people got a lot out of. And oftentimes people, my guests, were like, well, I don't make mistakes, or I don't consider it a mistake. And I was like, well, something that they can go right, or, whatever. Now, when I first came up with that question, my thought was that it would be a lot about technique. But it turned out that was not the case. And in fact, it turned out that many times people considered their mistakes, their errors, their missteps to be centered around lack of authenticity or presence or something that they not so much, they forgot to do an intervention properly, or they didn't do an intervention properly or a technique properly. Rather, it was about them not being present, or it had to do about themselves in a sense, and the lack of awareness or lack of self-development. And that really inspired them to focus on that more in their work, in themselves, in their practice. That really inspired me as I was continuing to do this podcast, because it really woke me up and it really made me realize the power of us honoring ourselves, us honoring our stories, us cultivating our own authenticity and really understanding what that means. And those elements inspired me to really create Trauma Therapist 2.0, which is my membership, to focus on inspiring new trauma therapists to not only get into the field and to become educated, but to focus on their own presence and authenticity. Because I think these things are elements that are often, bandied about in the field, but rarely do we go down a different level and say, okay, well, what does that mean to be authentic, to cultivate authentic? How does one do that? And those are the things that I love working on, that I love focusing on, that I love talking about. And I encourage you, if you're out there, if you're, starting out as a new trauma therapist, even if you're a seasoned clinician and you're looking for community, to check out Trauma Therapist 2.0. And you can do that by going to traumatherapist2.com, traumatherapist2.com. And in this environment, during this time, we need community. We need to talk to people who are going through what we're going through. We need to talk to people who are, passionate about trauma the way we're passionate about trauma, and helping those who've been impacted by trauma. I mean, let's face it, talking about trauma it's no joke. I mean, it's crazy to think about. I mean, when I think that I'm doing a podcast about trauma, sometimes I'm like, it's so crazy. It's not, the topic is just, it's hard. I mean, plain and simple. I can't even think of a better word than that, but it's hard and it sucks. But, one of the reasons I started this was to get the word out, because it is so prevalent. Abuse is prevalent. Bullying is prevalent. Domestic violence is prevalent. And a lot of times people, parents, teachers don't recognize that, this particular instance is traumatic or can be traumatic for that person, or that particular experience could be traumatic for that particular person. This is one of the things that I wanted to do through, creating this podcast and so forth. All right. So, anyway, I also want to thank you for listening, for continuing to listen to this podcast. I mean, the emails I get from you about how it's helping you and or inspiring you, really, I appreciate, and they make me feel good. They do, and they help keep me going. So I want to say thank you sincerely for listening and supporting this podcast. All right, let me wind down here. The workshop I'm doing next week, September, is starting in September of 2020. I'm going to be doing a Monday session. So each of the 4 Mondays or 5 Mondays, whatever, in September, and each of the Tuesdays in September. So you can get in the Monday cohort or the Tuesday cohort. You can check it out by going to my website, the traumatherapistproject.com, and going up top there, at the very top of the website, there's a banner. You can click on that to get more information. But, I wanted to create a workshop, how to create your own podcast for mental health professionals, again, advocates, survivors, clinicians of all kinds, because it's something that I've loved doing. Is the first time I'm doing, and because of that, this is a beta workshop, which means that I'm taking just a limited number of people and going to be working closely with them, really to find out. Of course, I'm going to come with an idea and a plan and a schedule, but I'm going to be asking you, those of you who sign up, what you need, what you want, and that therein will help me create and more solidify the schedule for this, or the curriculum for this workshop. But I'm going to be sharing, basically, peeling back the curtain, as it were, and sharing what I've learned. And believe me, I don't have all the answers. I'm not a Tim Ferriss or Joe Rogan by any stretch of the imagination, but I have been able to, create a podcast that's being downloaded, a lot per month, and been able to keep sponsors and get sponsors, and part of my business. And I want to share that and share the joy and the passion and what I've learned, and really work closely with you. One of the things I will focus on this is bringing out your voice, what it is you want to share. Because a lot of us feel like we have something to say, but maybe don't know how to say it. Or maybe we feel like, well, I'm not sure people are going to listen or want to listen. And I love talking about that stuff. I love, digging in and saying, wait a minute here, just because you think people aren't going to listen doesn't mean that people aren't going to listen. You have a body of knowledge, and being able to share that and direct, to the proper audience is exciting, and it's invaluable. Because I'm not, one of the things that I really focus on here is who I'm talking to. And I think that's really important when you are creating a podcast, thinking about who your audience is. I'm not a Dan Siegel or a Bruce Perry or, go on and on and on. They have a certain amount of knowledge, of course, that I don't have, and I'm very well aware of that. But it's about finding your passion and your center and your voice, and being able to package that in a way in a podcast. And that's one of the things that we'll be working on in this workshop. And I'm really excited about it, because I love getting in there and working with people to find that. The other thing is that if you are a clinician, if you do want to share your voice, it's a no-brainer to do a podcast. It's such a great way to get your voice out, to get your message out. And of course, you have to get really solid on what your expectations are. I'm not promising that, people are going to be the next Tim Ferriss. I mean, that would be completely unrealistic, nor am I. But being able to get your voice out there and use your podcast as something that can get your message out is a no-brainer for clinicians and people in the mental health space. Again, whether you're a survivor, an advocate, or a coach. So once again, if you are interested, again, I have a limited number of spaces for this, and I'm not kidding about that. I'm keeping it limited because I want to work hands-on with people. Head on over to the traumatherapistproject.com, go to the top of the website, and you can see the banner there with the information. You can click on that and get signed up for information. And again, I want to thank you for listening to this podcast. I so appreciate it. And we'll continue on. And signing off from Bend, Oregon. All right, folks, have an awesome day and stay healthy out there. Once again, thank you to Somatic Experiencing for sponsoring this podcast. Somatic Experiencing Trauma Institute is a 501c3 nonprofit dedicated to resolving trauma worldwide by providing professional training and education in somatic experiencing. It was founded by Dr. Peter Levine, author of the bestseller Waking the Tiger, who developed somatic experiencing based on explorations of how animals deal with threat, nervous system overwhelm, and traumatic experiences on a daily basis. Learn more about somatic experiencing and the SE Professional Training Program at traumahealing.org/TTP. That's traumahealing.org/TTP.